Scott's muted, I think. Yeah, I think you got.
I think we had some technical problems, but I will start again. Good evening, everyone. I'm Scott Johnson. Welcome to the Revive Edmonton Town Hall. I'll be monitoring tonight's conversation, part of Rahim Jaffer's citywide listening tour. Before we begin, please note that this session is being recorded as part of our effort to build transparency and gather feedback to shape the campaign. And if you're joining us online, we invite you to continue submitting your question throughout the evening using the chat box on the right-hand side of the screen at the bottom. We'll be monitoring it throughout the session. And I'd also like to begin with the land acknowledgement. We're gathered on Treaty 6 territory, the traditional land of the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, and Dakota Sioux peoples. We'll honor the Indigenous communities who cared for this land for generations and recognize their ongoing contributions to the city of Edmonton. So now let's begin an honest conversation about how we can revive this city for all of Edmonton. And let me say, good evening, Rahim.
Hi, thanks, Scott. It's great to be here again with everyone. I see we have even a bigger crowd than we did the other day, which is fantastic. Again, I'm so excited to be online with all of you tonight. Many of you know I'm Rahim Jaffer, and I'm running to be your next mayor here in Edmonton because I think Edmonton deserves real change, and change starts with listening. That's the whole point of some of these town halls that we've created. So I launched the Revive Tour because I want to rebuild trust, reset priorities, and bring accountability back to City Hall. Too many people feel like their voices don't matter anymore, and I'm here to try to change that. Our campaign is built on one simple promise for all of Edmonton. That means every community, every background, every voice. If you believe in that mission, I'd love for you to join Team Jaffer. We're looking for volunteers, supporters, and donors who want to help us bring common sense back to City Hall. Visit votejaffer.ca to sign up. Thanks again, Scott, for moderating tonight.
And let's get right into it with the big task you've been doing for the last couple of weeks and will continue well into the summer, and that's this listening tour and listening to what people have to say. And the feedback I've heard from you is there's a lot of topics out there, but the overwhelming majority concern for people is affordability and pocketbook issues. What are you hearing from them?
I heard so many of my own customers, and then while I'm out in the community talking to people, uh, everyone feels like this city has been nickeling, diming them at every level, which it's so upsetting to think that when so many people are suffering because either they're not making their ends meet with all the costs rising in every other way, whether it's utilities, whether it's groceries, whether it's rent. Some people are having to pay a lot higher rent than they ever have. Here we have a city that continues to try to squeeze more money out of them. And it just is baffling, especially because when they stop to ask, what kind of services are they getting back? I think you'd find that almost all of them feel like the city has let them down. And that's one of the things that I think is so frustrating for so many Edmontonians, that feeling of decline that they're seeing right in front of them, but having to pay so much more for it.
That feeling of decline, a couple of things going on right now. We just had the comedy festival. We just had the weekend playing Commonwealth Stadium. We're in the midst of Taste of Edmonton. We're in the midst of K Days. What's your sense of how Edmontonians are feeling about their city?
You know, I've always thought Edmonton is an amazing place because over the history that I was able to watch so many great events, and we still get some of them, but as I talked about on our last town hall, there were a lot of big events that a lot of people didn't have to pay for, but we were just so great at hosting them, whether there were bigger sporting festivals or whatever it might be that came to Edmonton. But what I'm really concerned about is that a lot of these festivals that used to be so affordable, where families could go for, family of four or more could go and spend some money, but not feel like they had to take out a second mortgage or get an extra couple $1,000s on their line of credit to enjoy the summer festivals. I mean, it's really out of reach for a lot of people. And I know, even talking to some that were coming in, they were asking me, do you know where I could get some free tickets for K Days? Because by the time we pay for the tickets, by the time we go pay for the rides, the food, like, you have to have $300 or $400 for a family of four. And that's pretty heavy. Like, there used to be a time you could go and enjoy the fair, four of the people, for like $100, and you had a great time. Same thing with some of the local festivals, like the Taste of Edmonton. It used to cost a couple tickets and you could go and spend $50 and you would be full. Like, you couldn't even use up the tickets. Now $50 gets you a hot dog and a beer, pretty much, which is so unfortunate when you think about that. Those festivals that have defined Edmonton, but are just unfortunately becoming out of reach for so many of those people that really can't make it work. So I think that's something that really concerns me. And I'd like to really, if I have the opportunity to serve as mayor, to really dive deep into how some of these festivals are running. What are the costs associated with them, and how can we make them so that it's more affordable for Edmontonians to enjoy?
Why do you think of that is? Is it because corporations around town can't sponsor these things because they don't have the available cash?
There's no doubt that we've seen a decline in that type of sponsorship. There was a time in this city where a lot of things were done by a healthy business group, a healthy people who were making money at all levels, whether it was small, medium, or large businesses, and they always gave back to their community. I think that's one of the fantastic things that was a really strong part of Edmonton's community, strong part of Edmonton's culture. I think it's true right now. A lot of businesses, there's some that are still doing well, but I would say the majority are suffering. And I can give you a perspective from a small business perspective on White Avenue. It never used to be a problem when someone could actually had the wherewithal and the entrepreneurial spirit to start a business on White Avenue. Most of the time they would hit it out of the park because people would come support them. There were relaxed parking rules. People would come in the evening, all days. Like, there was a lot of activity. I was so sorry to see. I talked to one of my neighbors just a couple of doors down. She had a great British shop called Brits and Bob's. She brought a lot of interesting things because she herself is from the UK. She filled a void with something really unique, I thought, and something that attracted people to the area. She just informed me she's closing on at the end of this week. She just couldn't make it work, and she didn't have enough money to order more inventory, which was the big problem. She couldn't find the capital. Put that with all the extra expenses she's paying, she's just decided to throw in the towel. In fact, she may have to declare bankruptcy. Just down the street from that, it was a great vegetarian restaurant. It opened not even 2 years ago. I just saw 4 lease signs up for them. I don't know how that happened or what the result was. But again, it speaks to this bigger problem where we're not supporting and creating an environment for businesses to succeed. So when you talk about that at a level of sponsorship or investment back into certain things that give people enjoyment, create a community, it's really caused a lot of problems for even those industrial leaders, business leaders who used to do that without thinking. So that's an indication that we do need to fix a system that's broken and create, in particular, an environment for businesses to succeed. I've said in the past that one of the things I think that used to be such a strong part of value that we put into entrepreneurship, we used to value that. And for some reason, over the last decade or so, it seems like this council and leadership has just taken that kind of entrepreneurship for granted, which is just a shame.
Those two examples, I'm betting they're not large in terms of square feet.
No, both of them are smaller than my restaurant for sure, and so their rent was probably not as bad as it was, maybe before when everything was thriving. Because a lot of landlords have had to work with their tenants and adjust accordingly to make sure that the tenants survive. Because ultimately, you'd rather have somebody and support them to continue to employ people, pay taxes, be a part of the community, and pay the rent, whatever that may be, than sitting vacant. And that's what's going to continue to happen.
All right. Well, lots of things going on. And when we kicked off this campaign, one of the first planks you put out there was on parking. And I was curious why you think previous councilors haven't done more to make parking affordable. And do you trust them to turn things around now?
Well, it seems to me the more that there seems to be a vision that these council, this leadership currently wants a carless city, because that's everything that they're trying to do, is trying to deter any sort of support for cars driving downtown, whether it's White Avenue, anywhere, to actually support business, do things, create things. It's really beyond me, because every option that I thought that they could take a turn to try to help support people going out to these parts of the city, especially entertainment districts where people would love to go in the evening, park their car, not have to worry about it until maybe even the morning if they're going to really enjoy themselves, and then come back and pick that up before the meters kicked in at 9 a.m. They've made you have to pay till 10 almost everywhere. They've raised the prices of the metered hourly meter for up to 450 from what I understand in some areas. And it totally goes against what we should be trying to do, which is make it easier for people to spend money in the businesses, in the community, in the things where it makes most difference. But of course, we know that City Hall has a spending problem. It's not a revenue problem, and that's one of the biggest challenges. Why we're seeing, as I said at the outset when I began my remarks, we see them trying to nickel and dime in order to try to support a lot of projects that, first of all, the city should not even be in, and that's where, unfortunately, it affects the average person so much directly in their pocketbook.
Even parks, right? They're wanting to charge for that now.
Exactly. This is like the parks don't even make any sense for me. This is something that all Edmontonians should have access to, whenever and regardless of financial background or condition. They should be able to go and enjoy the natural spaces that we have in this city without having to worry about paying for accessing them. They've already paid plenty in their taxes to support the infrastructure at many of these facilities. And the last thing I would ever want to see under any leadership that I would be able to have is having anyone to pay for those beautiful natural spaces, whether it be parks that we've created in communities or River Valley or any park for that matter, just again to support the lack of attention to budgets that this current council has had.
Why do you think there's this battle against the car culture here?
I look, I think there's something to be said whenever you can look at ways to improve the environment. And I think that's where some of this council and view has been is caught up in things that obviously they have good intentions with, but the outcome of their decisions has a completely opposite effect. Our city has always been large in landmass. Of course, we're trying to change that. We've got LRT, we've got other public transit to encourage people to ride. Of course, there's a safety issue, as we all know, with the current situation that's maybe deterring people from utilizing that to the maximum. But obviously, with this view that you want to try to eliminate cars for whatever reasons you have, it's going to have a negative impact on a city that obviously has had that culture right from its beginning. Can we change it over time? I'm sure. I'm sure there's going to be opportunities as the city continues to grow. Hopefully, we make transit safer, we make it affordable, we make allow people to take advantage of that. If we get these things right, then maybe less cars will be on the street. But right now, we have challenges with people can't get proper transportation. They can't afford often public transit given all the other costs that they have. And the safety issue is a big problem. So cars are still going to be around whether they like it or not for a while. And there's still a lot of people that rely on that. So the whole idea of eliminating parking, making it difficult for people to travel places because they choose to use private transportation is just outrageous. We need to review this, and we need to say we can't, at the expense of businesses, individual freedom, a number of things. We can't limit people's choices, especially when it comes to affordability, and think we're going to eliminate cars.
I think a number I heard, take up of private vehicles is somewhere between 75 and 80% of us want to drive ourselves.
Well, and and this will, I'm sure, lead to a conversation relating to infill, because we all know that's a pretty hot topic. But even on that, the city has missed the mark when it comes to allowing development that's responsible in certain neighborhoods, because there should be parking attached to each dwelling, which would then restrict these big mammoth projects in the middle of blocks that should never be there in the first place. But let's get back to that. I mean, the parking issue, the driving issue, that, like I said, I believe a lot of these things, if you have the right management in the city, will happen organically. If you do the basics right, like provide safety, provide good roads, provide the things that help people maybe consider even places to park and ride. I mean, we haven't thought any of these things through, yet we're building this mammoth thing that then people are kind of confused of how they're going to work. I think these are things that will come organically as more people come here. We are having this situation where the city is growing. It still is affordable compared to, as we know, places like Vancouver and Toronto. Hence, we're getting people coming here. So we really do need to think these things through and make it so that people can take advantage if they can't, if they want to have a car, if they need their car to get to where they're working, creating jobs, all these things tying together. But I know that it's very short-sighted to say just because ideologically we want to get rid of all the cars, we start doing all the things to make that happen. It's going to cause immense hardship, and already has for a number of people.
Well, one more question along those lines, but before I do, I remind everyone that the bottom right-hand corner, you can write in a question and we'll read it for Rahim and get your thoughts on what the public is saying. As a White Avenue businessman, the parking down by the farmers market, they started charging there. What was the conversation like for that, and what'd you think of it?
Well, and I think the city did, if I'm not mistaken, something so that some of that parking revenue could go to the Old Strathcona Business Association, or they were talking about that. But in the end, a lot of people appreciated, again, supporting the market, coming and being able to park for an hour or two, spending money at the market with a lot of these vendors. It's not cheap like it used to be for these vendors to actually set up at the farmers market. So, for them, it's crucial that they have a steady flow of people coming in, buying what they have to offer. But to do that, I think, again, it's just creating that animosity with our citizenry, that here they are trying to come out, support something that was so great in the city, and a landmark. The farmers market in Old Strathcona has been there for years, and it's a landmark. And putting one other barrier, as we see the city so good at doing, putting one other barrier in front of those who want to support businesses. And so I think, we should reverse that. I've talked about some of the things that I would like to see happen with parking. As we know, free after 5, free on Sundays, and limited from 9 to 5, and holidays as well be free. But where you've had such a successful model, I mean, why is the city trying to fix things that are not broken? And there was an example of something where the farmers market was, you could come in, access it, spend a couple hours and leave, and not have to worry about parking.
All right, you say you'll listen first, but once elected, how will you make sure neighborhood voices actually shape decisions on issues like infill instead of being just consulted after the fact? What do you
Well,
think of
I'll
that?
tell you this, I won't hide from votes, and I won't hide from public interaction and consultation. I think one of the things that I've been so disappointed to see how discourse has been going since the days I used to be fortunate enough to represent Edmontonians in Ottawa, is the ability to have town halls and hear from people, whether it is positive feedback or negative feedback. The reality is that you need an outlet to get constant feedback from people about what the city's doing right and what the city's doing wrong. It seems to me these sort of blanket knee-jerk reactions is not proper leadership. It doesn't have the impacts that we're looking for over a longer period of time. In fact, it has uh, outcomes that are unpredicted and unfortunately affect people's livelihoods. In the case of infill is a perfect example. People's houses that have been their nest egg for retirement have been affected so negatively because of just outlandish developments coming right in next door to them. So I believe so fundamentally in the idea of having public interaction, town hall meetings, the ability to be open so people feel that their elected representatives are accessible. This is what true democracy is. And one of the things that I plan to do, if I'm fortunate enough to become the next mayor in Edmonton, is to have town halls again. I think they used to happen many years ago, but in City Hall, where the mayor stands up in front of those who want to be there and asks whatever questions they have, and have these regularly. So you have a citizenry that feels engaged, doesn't feel frustrated, doesn't feel angry, but feels like they can have a say and that they're heard. And that's something I fundamentally believe needs to change in this city.
I recall it was 12 of them a year, one in each ward, and they take the summer off. So the rest of the time it was a little more often than once a month. Is that what you're
Yeah, and
looking
you know
at?
what? Yeah, I do. I remember, like I said, my it was a thing. Like we would all do them at all levels. Public engagement is one of the foundations of democracy. It was also one thing I found was a great way to relieve pressure on issues that people get pent up frustration because they feel no one is hearing them, and yet they're paying higher taxes, they're involved in their communities, they're doing everything right, but yet they're not being heard and they're not being listened to, and they're, as a result of following the rules, they're getting penalized. This is something that will be very detrimental to our system of democracy if we don't change it. As an elected official before, like I said, I put myself out there, and I knew sometimes I'd come out with some scrapes and bruises and such just from some tough debate. But just allowing that pressure to be able to be released in that kind of forum, it ended up forging relationships that were able to move things forward together, because I learned new things, or people felt they were heard, they felt I was approachable, they felt that they may not always get their way, as I've said, in democracy, but they sure get their say. And that's something that I think is, like I said, people feel on all fronts right now that that's not happening, and that's where this frustration is reaching a boiling point.
As you tune in, please don't let me monopolize the conversation. Ask your question. You can do so by reaching to the bottom right hand corner and typing in something you want to hear from candidate Rahim Jaffer. Would you do consultation too, not just with the public at large, but specific groups, business roundtables or social agencies, that sort of thing? Make it focused on one or two topics.
Yeah, I think there's a couple ways you can do that. You can put some topics out there that may attract that particular group. You can work directly with those groups and see if they'd like to host a town hall or something where we could, as elected officials, come out and be a part of. And like I said, I have no fear in that regard. That I would probably learn some new things, and if I don't have all the answers, even better. By having that engagement is what I think brings people together, as well as gets, as I said, things that maybe had been overlooked on some sort of a stage, so we might be able to address it. I think that's something that we have to realize is not a bad thing. If you have a chance to have these sort of interactions, that's how we as elected officials, I think in the past, that's the way I approached it, that you learn and you get better and you do a better job of being there and not just making decisions in a vacuum. So that's something that I feel like with various groups. I know that we're already getting invitations as we get closer to October from different interest groups, different segments of the population that represent larger voices, and they want to host debates. And I'm all for that. I think those are the great ways to hear what people are thinking. And so I would definitely work with no matter whom under the spectrum, uh, to be able to address issues that are feeling that they're concerned about, be a part of their efforts to do public engagement. And this sort of spirit, I ask everyone listening, do you see that spirit at City Hall at all right now? Like, there's no leadership in that spirit, even amongst the elected officials. They're not talking to one another. They're not trying to work out their differences. They're not focusing on points of commonality and then going from there. Everything's a fight. And how do you serve your constituents when that's the way leadership is being held at City Hall?
The late great Councillor Ron Hayter once told me that no matter what you do, you're not going to make everybody happy.
Exactly. That's what democracy is. As I said, the one thing that we can do to ensure that democracy works is exactly what I remember. I think it was Deborah Gray used to say this back in the day when I used to be a federal MP. She said, the most important thing that we can do as elected officials is give everyone a chance to have their say. But in a democracy, they may not get their way. But as long as they're participating and feel like they can have positive input, and they may lose the vote or they may not get their way again, like I said, that's what democracy is. But that participation part is crucial. Right now it seems like just the councillors and the mayor of the past previous councils, they're just getting their way without anyone having their say, and that's completely upside down.
When you were a member of parliament and you had these town halls or roundtables or whatever format you chose, did you have an aha moment? Did the light bulb go off and you maybe found a solution that you didn't see coming?
I wish I had more of those, Scott. Sometimes you don't have too many aha moments when you're stuck in politics, and that's what people criticize us for. But hence, that's the reason why you can possibly get that. And I'll admit, there were some tough debates. Like I remember some times where there were contentious issues that were being debated at the House of Commons, and issues that people were really fired up about. So I found that, like I said, they weren't easy to walk into a room where people were upset. But like, I put myself out there, you listen to them, you share some thoughts, get questions, because that's the best way to do it. And then, like I said, there were times where if I didn't think of something, I would always say, that's an interesting point. I'm sorry, I don't have an answer on that, but I'd like to learn more, or I can try to get more information, and definitely get back to you. And right there, that would forge a relationship where if someone was bringing something valuable to the table, they would feel like, yeah, now there's engagement, and I would follow up with them, because sometimes that was very useful information. But yeah, there were times that you just learned something new, and people appreciated that. That's the one thing I remember. I had people come in sometimes very angry, but then at the end they would come up to me and say, Rahim, you really took the time to listen, and I really appreciate that. You might not be able to do anything about it, but the fact that you're here putting yourself out, trying to understand, makes a big difference for me. And so, that felt good, that at least, like I said, some of those bruises or scars were worth it when someone feels like someone's listening to them.
Everything heals in time. Please send your questions in, as Jeff Johnson has. He writes, Rahim, the access for constituents in regular town hall meetings with you sounds wonderful. Just what we need. If you become mayor, will you encourage your fellow councillors to also make themselves accessible to their constituents with regular town hall opportunities, either in their wards or at City Hall?
Yeah, I'm glad that question came up, because I think I within a campaign happening, you're focusing on just your role in what you're running for. But clearly, as I'd mentioned before, one of the things the mayor has to do is to coordinate effectively with a number of different stakeholders. And of course, the city councilors are the biggest stakeholder that we have to work together with in order to move things forward. So I would easily open up the town halls that I could vision to have at City Hall. I would invite any of the councilors or all of them to be a part of it, because clearly one of the great things of that kind of opportunity is that even though you have chambers, you have people ability to speak there, it's not the same as when you can just be in front of a group that may have whatever questions that they have. So I would encourage them to be a part of this sort of initiative, those who choose to be, because chances are at the city, you're going to get people from all different wards coming to the event, to the town hall. And so it'd be great if the colleagues that were in City Hall would all do it together. It maybe not, it doesn't have to be every month, but at least, once every couple of months, they could do ones in their own wards, which I would encourage them to do, especially if you want to get reelected. You got to hear your constituents. And that engagement is something that I would encourage them to do in their local wards. But that spirit of cooperation, whether we're doing it at City Hall and I'm inviting them to be there, or if they're doing it in their wards and they want me to be there, I'd be happy to do that, because I think, again, that's how you open up that dialogue that benefits everyone.
Okay, you've been a member of parliament, you've been a businessman, but you've never been on council. Why should voters believe you can deliver where experienced councillors have failed?
That almost sounded like a blessing the way you opened that up, because of what people are telling me about people who are on council now. I haven't seen too many people excited about what their representation has been like. It's almost like they're saying they want a reset, or they want something new, they want something fresh. So I think it's interesting because generally, as we all know, in municipal politics, name recognition, incumbency, all of those things become a big factor when elections come around again. Sometimes after a certain period of time, there comes a level of frustration that if people do, as I said, if there's a failure in democracy, as we've identified, especially in the consultation side of things, that all of a sudden things can boil over and you can have outcomes in municipal elections, just like other levels, that maybe people weren't expecting. I hazard a guess that this might be one of those elections, because the amount of frustration that I'm hearing from people, from door knocking, from coming into my restaurant, to meeting them at events, is at a level I've never heard. They may still like the individual that they voted for in the past, but they just feel like there's a disconnect. And so that's something I think that a fresh new perspective, as I've spoken about, someone who's been on the ground in the community just like everyone else, but brings in a different perspective to City Hall, I think is becoming more and more in demand. And let me tell you, even though I had not been physically on council, when I served as a member of parliament, we had our team of Edmonton MPs met with the provincial government regularly, because it was so important for us to be on the same page, so we could put a foot forward for the city that was similar, whether it was on the provincial side or the municipal side. I remember going into the mayor's office and sitting down with the mayor and talking about, our Edmonton caucus would talk about issues and how could we get on the same page and what could we support, what could we work together for. That spirit, I don't think, even exists anymore. And that type of energy of cooperation is, I think, what I can bring to the table again, not only with my colleagues on council, but with, so importantly, with the two other levels of government that I think just doesn't exist at the level that it needs to. Because let's face it, we know the Constitution states that municipalities are creatures of the province. Granted, there's been more and more unloaded onto the cities over the last number of years. But again, by getting on the same page, even though we may not share the same views all the time between the provincial government and the municipal government, there are still huge initiatives, whether they be on crime enforcement and the justice side of things, cooperation on social services where we need to help people that are caught on dependency challenges and such. These things have to be coordinated, otherwise you don't get an outcome that is effective. You're only going to have one-sided results that are going to only result in only half measures being achieved. So I think I joked and said it's a blessing maybe that I haven't been on council, but I really fundamentally believe that we need a reset. And I'm somebody, from the experience that I have, not only federally, but in the community, as a father, as a business owner, I think maybe that's exactly what we need in City Hall right now.
That's going to be a tough nut to crack, though, with a council. No matter what happens in October, it'll be polarized. There'll be the left and the right, or however you want to do it. So sure, you can work with the guys that you agree with. How do you work with the ones that are on the other side?
So I think another example I can share with you is a business example, and again, one that I can draw on from my previous political experience. Obviously, when I joined the party because there were certain aspects that I really believed in. But I can tell you, quite frankly, there was probably 70% of the party's direction I didn't agree with. But that's just the way parties worked. I find that, unfortunately, what's happened over the last number of years, the partisanship that comes from party organization has creeped into every level of politics. And I think it's working not in favor of our citizenry. It's quite the opposite. I remember that even though we had some heated debates in the House of Commons, even in committees, sometimes there were some fireworks. Without fail, at the local watering hole during that week, there would be friends from the NDP, from the Liberals, from all the parties that we would get together and we would chat. And sometimes we get a little bit heated, but by the end of having that camaraderie or that respect for each other as elected people from different parts of the country, we got a better understanding of each other's perspectives. And then when we went back to caucus, when issues came up, we could share, hey, look, this is where these guys are coming from. They're really not that far off from where we are. What if we adjusted this? Because then we could work together and actually get this done. I was so happy when those kind of opportunities came up. And I'll admit that some of the people I worked with back then from other parties are still friends of mine, and we still sometimes talk. And that's amazing when that can happen. It's no different within the province. It shouldn't be any different at the city level. That, yeah, there's going to be times where you're going to be really passionate about certain things. But as I said from the outset, there are a lot of things that are in common, because if we're all elected to make city, this in this case, municipal election, if we're all trying to be elected to make the city better, there is already some common ground there. And it's just a matter of choosing how and what exactly we need to do to get on the same page. And again, it'll take a bit of work. It'll take a bit of relationship building, and it'll take some leadership. But I believe that that can happen regardless. We have, for the first time, political parties being introduced into the municipal election. We know that it's a tough thing to do in a short period of time, but there will be some organization. I can bet you that not all of those political slates or party individuals will get elected to the city hall. There might be a smattering of them. So you're going to be, again, in a situation where if people don't have the leadership to bring people together and figure out where we can have common ground, you're going to have a council just as fragmented and not working in the interests of Edmontonians. And that's something that I know that I'll put a stop to.
And we have another question in the queue, but before I get to it, sounds like you're saying everybody agrees on where they want to go, but you have differing ideas on how to get there. Is that right?
Well, on like, if we get back to the basics of, if we can agree, which I think we should be able to, is what should a city be doing, and try to do that the best that we can. That in itself brings us together. There's different people that are going to have different projects, for instance, maybe in their ward, maybe as it applies to Edmonton. There's going to be things that sometimes might be difficult for everyone to get on the same page, but over time, over learning more about it, maybe some of these ideas make sense, maybe they don't. Again, one thing that's going to be crucial moving forward, if we get, like I'm going to continue to talk over the course of the campaign, of getting back to the basics of what a city should do. If we keep that the focus, so that all of us can agree that, look, the roads, the infrastructure, the number of other areas, whether it's creating an environment for businesses to succeed so we can have things thrive again in the city. There's a number of things that can bring us together, which, as I said, our citizens are expecting us to do some things on this. Safety in the communities and all these things. That's, I think, a starting point. Then where we will need to discuss and work on is what approaches we would all feel that would work and what wouldn't work. But again, that spirit of cooperation on the basis of how we improve those basic things for Edmontonians will take us a long way. Right now, you can't even get agreement of where a bike lane should go, let alone which road should be fixed. And you have all these projects going on that are totally creating congestion in the city with no real planning. It just seems to be so dysfunctional that I think Edmontonians really are getting tired of that kind of thing.
You're talking about the bureaucracy, and I'll get to that in a minute or two. But from the chat box, I love the focus of the Revive Edmonton idea. People serving in the community now have had years to create a better Edmonton and have failed miserably. It's time to revive our city to its former glory rather. What do you intend to do, if elected, to build a better environment in Edmonton to ensure that small and medium businesses will flourish and life comes back to the downtown core?
Well, and I think I alluded to creating an environment for businesses to succeed. There are a number of measures I'll be talking about, especially as we get through these town halls and leading into the end of August, that will specifically help to spark that investment by looking at the tax burden that businesses and individuals face in the city, looking at ways to increase times when it comes to permitting for those who want to invest into the city and make it easier for them to do so. And we might even look at ways to be able to reduce that burden in ways we haven't seen for a long time. Those kind of things. And then, of course, with that, I noticed the end of that question talks about the safety for the LRT and stuff like that. Safety is so important right now because people don't feel safe. So we can make, as we've seen downtown, so much public money go into things like, the most recently the Oilers Park that they're proposing and other initiatives, but we're not getting the results because if people don't feel safe about coming downtown, they're not going to come regardless of what you build. And so this has to be hand in hand with any economic plan to stimulate growth in the city and reduce those barriers, reduce those costs for potential investors and Canadian and Edmontonians. We have to look at making sure that once, if these people are going to invest into our downtown or into other parts of the community, that safety is a priority, because without having that safety, as I said, we're not seeing that flourishing downtown that we would all like to see, or that White Avenue that's thriving, or 124th Street, or even 118th Avenue, where they've been working so hard to try to create a business district there. They're not going to succeed unless the city also pulls up the boots and say, we have to have safer streets. We have to have police presence. Community policing has to be a priority. These are the things that have to work hand in hand. Otherwise, you're again, like you said, you're not going to, like I said, you're not going to get the outcomes, the desirable outcomes that you may have set out to achieve.
How do you feel about reporting and response when somebody sees something that's not right? You want the city to get on it right away.
Well, yeah, and that applies to both infrastructure as well as safety issues. You wouldn't believe how many people are so frustrated when they're seeing something happen, for instance, a crime in progress, or something takes place that is obviously unsafe. By the time they get a hold of someone, they're just hoping maybe someone drives by from like a police officer, or a peace officer, or a sheriff or something, because you can never get a hold of someone. There's no immediate response to things that are sometimes very dangerous. That happens on the safety side, but again, even on the infrastructure side, I think we've called the city on a number of occasions because we have this one sidewalk right in front of our restaurant where I've watched and pulled my hair out almost. Thank God it hasn't come out yet. But I pulled my hair to think that there's someone going to trip and it's going to be a lawsuit for the city, because the sidewalk has been off balance for years and we've been trying to get someone to come and fix it. Yet they came twice to rip out the road. Two falls in a row. They ripped out the front of the road in front of my restaurant without any warning, because EPCOR came to fix some water line and then came back again to fix the problems that they created from the first fix. And yet they're not even fixing the sidewalk where, like I said, there have been people fall. So again, I'm at a loss to say, what is the problem? People have complained about permits, timely permits. People have complained about other services taking forever. Even someone mentioned to me not that long ago that they were applying to get a permit for a festival. They've been waiting over 6 months to even get a response from that. Like, is it a personnel problem? Do we need to move some city personnel from one department to another in order to help? Is it a backlog, or is it just inefficiency? This is something that I think Edmontons deserve much better than they're getting on this, but there needs to be a real review of what in fact is happening. Why are these things taking so long? Why aren't we getting the responses we used to get? And why is red tape holding up the process?
Well, you asked the question. What's the answer?
Well, it's one, like I said, I think there's two ways to go about it. One is to evaluate, first of all, where is the biggest stream of demand coming in, and why, especially if there's backlogs, as I've heard, of up to 6 months in some cases. What is the reason for those backlogs? Is there a manpower shortage? Are there other ways we can explore, whether it's AI to help process some of these applications in the short term to get them to a point where we can move them faster? Or do we just put a hard, fast deadline of like 30 to 45 days once a permit is accepted in its form to be able to be turned out? And how do we meet those type of deadlines so that there's some sort of fire that's been lit under the bureaucrats to say, look, if it's whatever issue it is to deal with, let's deal with it, because it's unacceptable that people have to wait. But as I said, being an outsider, it puts me at a little bit of a disadvantage to know exactly how these bureaucracies are functioning. But on the receiving end of being somebody who's had to deal with them and hearing from those people that have to, what's happening right now is unacceptable. So I do have some solutions. And again, as we launch some of the details that we hope to include in our policy document, our policy rollout over the next little while, we'll start addressing some of those things in the near future.
Are you hearing from people on that? Are they coming to you with a perception of the bureaucracy is starting from the stance of no, and you would like to see them come from a presumption of yes?
Well, there's definitely barriers. Like, this is the one thing that I've seen is that instead of encouragement, because clearly, in order for the bureaucracy to flourish too, as I've said before, when you have a thriving private sector, a thriving business community, that totally helps us improve and fund. You talked about sponsorship before for different festivals. I would say that, investments into key arts communities, whether it was a Winspear Center of the Arts, the Jubilee Auditorium, or even, other key investments into university for giving us that advantage that we've had for so long over other institutions across the country. All of these things stem from a strong private sector, a strong business base that can help to support these things. We used to see that happen regularly, and it's on the decline. And so, obviously, for somebody in the permitting department, somebody involved in other areas of the bureaucracy where they're dealing with this issue directly, maybe they just need to be reconditioned to say, look, guys, if you're able to move these things faster, it benefits everyone, including yourself, because a bigger tax base is a better opportunities for everyone to do things that maybe they can't do right now because we're squeezing so many people tightly, and the affordability thing is killing us. So ultimately, how do we make it work quicker? Because for sure, I would put hard, fast deadlines on those permits coming through and open up that attitude that we will do it, rather than, oh, it can't be done, because that positive attitude has a huge impact on those considering investing into Edmonton in the future, for sure.
Another question from the chat inbox. I ran into some American tourists who were driving to Alaska. They shared that they thought Edmonton was a nice city, but were shocked when they pulled into a fast food drive through and suddenly found three burgers, two fries, ketchup, a milkshake, and a large Pepsi shoved through their window with no bag. If elected, will you be encouraging council to continue on chasing social agendas? What really is the core work of a city council?
It's an interesting example, and it's one that I talk about when we touch on a lot of things that have become very ideological when you're trying to manage a city, and the outcomes of that ideology that aren't necessarily the outcomes that people would want, because of the costs associated with it, because of the inconvenience, because of a number of things that really are short-sighted when you're putting some of these big grandiose things in place at the local level. I've always believed that these things can happen organically. Consumers can dictate what they would like their restaurants, their vendors to do, especially if it fits in an agenda that they decide to spend their money where they decide to spend it because of people who are making changes. Let's say a burger chain decided they wanted to not give bags or give an option for charging for a bag. Well, that's a market decision that then those who are supporting that business can say, well, I like that, I'm going to go spend my money there. But to try to socially engineer a lot of things that this council has done, the outcomes are just they go sideways. They don't create that that outcome that they're hoping for. And again, it nickels and dimes the citizens that are already paying too much. I mean, how much is too much? We look at the tax base, property taxes over the last 2 years have gone up, I think, upwards of 17%. That's outrageous in just the back-to-back years. Some of the property values have had a direct impact on the negative side as a result of this kind of increase. And that social engineering, whether it be 15-minute cities, whether it be the example you talked about when it comes to the paper bags, all of these things again are social engineering that if you allow the market to work effectively in these kind of things, because again, these aren't necessarily the purview of what a city has to get back to when it talk about back to basics. You will see an outcome that will be very different, and people will dictate those kind of things from their vendors, from the people that they're doing business with. The city doesn't have to get involved and create more costs, not only the administration side, but obviously for those consumers. And I'll give you an example how outrageous some of those changes were when we were told, I think it was a year ago or 2 years ago when they did the plastic ban in the city, single-use plastic. I had what seemed to be an army of people that were hired to put this thing in place on behalf of the city. They were marching up and down White Avenue, and they were all carrying these recycle, cards, and that the new rules that are coming in on, I think it was June or July 1st. And they were, I don't know how much they were being paid. They wouldn't tell me any information, but they came into my restaurant, brought this stuff in, and said, you know that the city is going to a single-use plastic ban. Here's the information. And I said, okay, well, I don't know if I agree with this, especially we're a small independent place. I've, bought inventory. I have plastic straws. I have some spoons. I have such. At least I can, use these up, and then we won't buy anymore. And he turned to me and he said, no, you can't use those anymore after July the 1st. And I said, well, what am I supposed to do with them? He goes, it's not our problem. I said, well, is the city willing to buy them from me at least to offset my costs? Because this is something that I've invested into, because this I never expected would come down so quickly. No, you just got to put them away or do whatever. Even, I think he said, throw them away. And I said, how the heck does that help the situation? But there was no concept. He's getting paid whatever it was with this group that I said was marching up and down the streets giving these pamphlets out to everyone, but no consideration for the impact on us that, first of all, had to execute this crazy plan and the costs associated with the inventory that I had. That didn't matter to him at all. So that sort of sensitivity, if that is going on in the bureaucracy, I should have used this example in the past with the last question. I mean, what kind of bureaucracy is doing anything then to help the people that are trying to create opportunities to pay them? That was the thing that blew my mind.
Outside your, or at least in the entrance of your restaurant, you've got the chalkboard A-frame with the 3 Bs: breakfast, burgers, and I can't remember if it says beer or brew, but
Bruce.
Bruce, you sell burgers. What are you doing now? You got
Sorry.
bags? What are you doing now?
Our business. Yeah. Well, you know what? Like I said, we do have paper bags. Thank God I had some. But I'll tell you, the odd person will ask me, because we do still have plastic. I've kept them. I'm not going to throw them away. And they said, is there any way you can give me a plastic bag? Because I'm walking back to my hotel and I won't be able to hold it in this. So of course, we'll give them a plastic bag. We're not going to not give it to them if we have it. But yeah, it's just like I said, these sort of things, let the market decide, because the city shouldn't be social engineering this stuff. It'll happen. People want change. We've seen huge change over the years by consumers that demand that they want local, or they want this, or they want that. Governments don't have to socially engineer this stuff. And that's where I think cities in particular, and our city, Edmonton, has gone completely off track, because they haven't asked themselves, how can we do a better job on what the core services that the city should be giving to its people? How do we focus on that and do it best before we start getting into all these other things that are not even in the purview of the city's responsibilities?
You have said that there's a breakdown in trust between City Hall and the neighborhoods, but what specifically will you do differently to rebuild that trust?
Well, I think there's a number of issues, not just the infill issue, that I find people are frustrated about, namely because there's not that interaction to see how communities can maintain either what they've created, which in Edmonton, we're very fortunate to have some great character communities. If the city took an interest to be able to see how that can be maintained, but still allow for upgrades and development in a way that maintains that type of uh, character that we don't see in too many neighborhoods. I think they would really respond to that. There seems to be a complete disconnect because of this view on density, that density at all cost, but it seems that is just so out of touch with what people want in the city, whether it's that kind of communication interaction between the different levels of bureaucracy that are involved in planning and development, the elected officials, even with some of the things like parks and other things that need to be properly developed with the communities. That kind of engagement that I talk about is something that I'm very committed to, because I think without the involvement of those who have helped to build this city over the past decades, and not thanking them for what they've done. I mean, we are all enjoying the fruits of so many people's labor that have helped to build this city into something we're all so proud of. And we've got such great potential here. But it seems like a lot of those people feel like they've just been left behind. There's no value attached to what they've done. There's no value to their contribution. And that's the direct result of what we're seeing right now, with that complete disconnect from city council, the mayor's office, and also the third part, which is the bureaucracy and its citizenry. So that's something that I said I think we can do differently by getting into those neighborhoods, working with people, hearing what their concerns are, and making adjustments. I don't think people are unreasonable, even on this infill issue, where I've been talking to so many Edmontonians. If you tell them, well, what kind of development would you go for? Because they don't mind if properties are improved. It increases their value, especially if you get in the one example I talked about in the last town hall, where there was a neighborhood that we went into that was Royal Gardens, where we had a big eightplex that was built between two bungalows. I mean, everyone I talked to there said, if there was a duplex, even maybe a fourplex, even though I get a little nervous with a fourplex, but a duplex would have been great. We would have been happy. There's some tasteful ones, they said, in the neighborhood, but to have this monstrosity come up, like how people in bureaucracy or elected officials like the councillors, how they're not hearing this or seeing this as being detrimental is just, there's a complete disconnect. So just engagement is something that I think is so easily done. As local representatives, that's what it's all about. Like sometimes you can say your provincial MLA or your federal MP, they're out, they're obviously talking to us, but they're away from the city. Representative, where are you if you're not in your communities? Where are you if you aren't hearing this sort of thing? This is what just boggles my mind.
Is the pushback from other councillors, or is it from the bureaucracy, or both? What's going on?
I think, like I said, I use the example of the tail wagging the dog. I think that because there is not that leadership that everyone's agreeing has been missing at City Hall, not only at the council level, but in particularly from the leadership in the mayor's office. Because there's not that leadership and things are so fragmented, and we saw how things blew apart before the end of this session, just earlier this month. The bureaucracy tends to, I think, start to lead because they don't see the leadership coming from their elected leaders, and that's who's supposed to be leading. So in the end, that's where I think there's a breakdown, obviously, in the spirit and cooperation in City Hall, as we've all seen. As a result, the bureaucracy just goes ahead and does things without really thinking about the impacts of these things, because in the end, we saw the vote that the bigger developments in these communities are still allowed to go ahead. So of course they're just going to follow that marching order and not necessarily think about the impacts if that leadership is missing at City Hall.
We welcome more questions as we move into our final half hour here, and just go to the chat box on the bottom right hand part of your screen. In terms of the listening, because that's what you've been doing for the weeks now that you've been mulling over this run and then actually announcing it. Besides from the infill, what are you hearing? Is there something that's maybe not the number one thing on the podium, but takes the silver medal?
Well, as a lot of these things are important to a lot of different people, but I've been fortunate when you mention listening. I think one of the things, even before, as you said, formally getting back involved in this process to be able to bring some leadership that I hope would help the situation that we're facing in Edmonton. Just being a business leader in the community, but also, as I mentioned, and many know, I'm a father, and before I got back involved in the business side of things, my partner at the time, Helena, was going to law school, and so I was a stay-at-home dad. A lot of people were shocked to hear that because coming from the lifestyle I had, traveling, being an MP, doing lots of different things, to going straight home and taking care of my son, they said, "Wow, we've never seen anyone with such an extreme makeover as Rahim's had." But I really enjoyed that time because it gave me a chance to look at things that a lot of people maybe miss, especially often the male figure at home when there's kids to be raised. They're the ones that are out working traditionally. It's changing a lot, which is great. But having that opportunity to be at home with my son, getting involved at the parent boards at schools that he was attending, doing some fundraising, working with other parents, I was hearing lots of things that more obviously at the provincial level through education, but still things that could be done so much better locally. And there seemed to be a disconnect, with the demand for schools, the changes to school properties, like all these things were issues that I kept hearing, this frustration, this feeling like people were not getting the ear of those who, whether it was in the bureaucracy or whether it was elected officials, to get some things moving, get things done. There was always frustration; things were being stalled. So it gave me a really unique perspective to be involved in that side of things and not. And be fully engaged with with the challenges of schools, and my son was doing while he was in grade school. After getting involved in business, it changed a little bit, where even though I still kept in touch with all those parents I was working with and met new ones as Xavier continued on going to different classes. But the feedback you get from running your own business, especially a retail business where you are interacting with people all the time, is amazing because you hear everything from, parking frustrations, as I've shared, people even coming into our restaurant, frustrations in neighborhoods where they feel like, there was one gentleman that was telling me how 6 different times there was either EPCOR or the city or something came at different summers to rip out the same road they ripped out the year before because they had to do a different job now in the same area. Why that couldn't have been coordinated more effectively. And so you just go in there once, get everyone lined up, do that segment of the street, then come back and maybe do the next segment. But just he couldn't believe it. And this is the frustration he shared with me even on that. When we look at infrastructure falling apart in some cases, and then just clogs of problems due to congestion because of the way the planning's gone, and some of these bigger projects being so close to each other and just creating havoc in the city. But one thing really simple that I think a lot of people don't think about, but I've heard so many people, again, that drive, because people do still drive in this city, but there's so many lights that have been put in different places that impede the flow of traffic to the point where I think we're adding to our greenhouse gas emissions in this city, because ultimately, whether it's new lights that are stopping every block, you go down 109th Street from, I would say, almost 76th Avenue and further. If you go down 109th trying to get to the university, the traffic is so backed up there every morning, and none of the lights are coordinated. So you have a stop and start for some people that spend 20 minutes in that zone before they even get to the university, and you're 5-10 minute walk from where they are. And because there's no coordination on so many little things like this that create a bigger problem, how do we move people effectively? The LRT, we decided, those in power have decided in the past to keep it above ground. How many silly congestion situations do we have as a result of the way the train's running? And then you're stuck waiting at a light if you're in the wrong side of the street for even 15 minutes, depending on what's happening. There's no thought in how do we stop? How do we allow flow? How do we make things work smoother we've just mashed this all stuff together without thinking about anything. So these are weird examples, but again, they speak to how a city works. And the city is dysfunctional, like in so many ways. People are so frustrated. But if you take the time to look, it makes your head spin, and you just think, "Oh my God, why isn't there any common sense to this?"
Sounds like there's a technology solution in the works. And
Easy. It just, again, you mentioned about engagement. And this is where maybe, like I said, I've been fortunate because I'm on the ground in an area where there's generally a lot of traffic, where there's so many different issues, and in a business, and we live there, close to it. So I'm seeing all these things, and I just wonder, what are these counselors not going by these areas? Are they not seeing these things? Where do they live? Like, I just, if I was had an ability to do something, and I saw these problems, I would be doing something, but nothing's going on.
all right, in the chat box, and this looks like it's another zoning type question. There is a new school in Summerside, PEI, that has in-house dental and medical services, family counseling activities, or family counseling activities in the gymnasium, and the others as well. Wraparound services designed from scratch. Most of our schools are empty in the summer and unused after 4 in the afternoon. Have you thought about how City Council might work with our schools, which are in every neighborhood, to deliver enhanced services in our neighborhoods?
You know what? What an idea! That's an excellent idea. It's true. That's infrastructure that is often sitting empty, as you mentioned, in the evenings, in the summers. I know there's some programming in some of the schools, but a majority of them are probably available for that kind of opportunity to look at ways to enhance services. I would be totally open to that idea, to see how we can utilize that space, especially if it helps certain groups of individuals, certain people who need it. Look at ways to collaborate a little bit more effectively, because you're right. I mean, these are some of the things that I think speak to the idea of engagement and bringing good ideas, and maybe bringing to the attention those who are elected, who are missing some of these opportunities, in order to see how we can maybe change and utilize those things much more effectively to achieve the outcomes that we would like to achieve, especially with helping people that are needing more specific services and are not getting it. Again, I'll go back to the idea, because that kind of thing, if you have a decent relationship with the province, if you have the ability to go knock on the door there of the legislature and say to whoever's in power, we got this idea, and of course, education is provincial, but we've got the ability to work and coordinate and help to achieve maybe the utilization of this space that's underutilized. If we get on the same page, can we come up with a solution? Well, just that openness of spirit and coming up with that idea, it might take a little while to get the ball rolling and get used to this kind of openness and working cooperative spirit of working with the provincial government. But it's not happening now. So even to try to achieve some of that stuff that would be able to be a positive thing people would agree with, you need better collaboration as well with the provincial government, in order to open these ideas up in the area of education and the infrastructure around some of the schools that are available.
Excellent question, and we encourage more to be sent our way in the chat box. A couple more here. You've talked a lot about economic revival. How would you make permits faster, and if so, how?
I touched on that a little bit, and I'm happy to repeat that and give a little bit more detail, because one of the things, like I said, that is really of a concern to me. I know that another example, and there's so many unfortunate examples like this. It just makes me sad and upset that why it's being so difficult. But I talked a little bit, I think, about this at the last town hall, that there's a fellow and their family owns a building just down the street of where Rooster is, and it's an older building. There's a liquor store, a convenience store, some small apartments upstairs, and he came in to see me and said, the building's falling apart. We've been trying to look at options, because we'd like to rebuild and obviously add more density and create a nicer building, which would be more valuable, higher taxes. He said, just to get a shovel in the ground, it's taken a long time, first of all, to get to the point where they would be, and money, to get to the point where their permits would be approved. But just to get a shovel in the ground, it was, he said something crazy like $80,000 to get through the process with the city. So they've just thrown up their hands and said 80 grand. That's would it's a significant amount of money that could go into the project. So there it sits, dilapidating, tax revenue's been lost. And again, the permitting just doesn't seem to be coordinating effectively. So he mentioned two things. One was timing, how long it would take, the city said, in order to get the permits. And then secondly, the cost. So those are things that are easily identified. Is okay, what is the timing? Do we need more people? As I said, do we need to reallocate certain members of the bureaucracy into this area where there might be a backlog? Are there other technological advances we can look at to help alleviate the backlog? But most of all, why is the cost so exorbitant? Like, if we know the city's going to recoup so much more money by a new property that's valued much higher, that is going to be contributing to the aesthetic uh, fabric of the avenue, it's going to create density, which is something that they want. Why is this going to cost so much in the upfront? Try to figure out ways to maybe put it on the back end. Work with people who want to invest and say, look, we'll make it easier for you. We were not going to charge you this, or we're not going to put this restriction on you. We're going to make it easier for you to make those investments up front so you can get permitted and build. And then we'll look at ways to work with you downstream to maybe collect some of that may be so important for the city. Again, these are things I want to learn more about, but there's simple solutions to encourage investment and to still have the same outcome of increased revenue down the line. Just make it easier for people to be able to do this. And this is something, like I said, I'm just amazed at what the city is doing for timing and costs relating to permits. And I can guarantee you there's a better way and faster way to be able to do it. And I'm almost willing to suggest that, we need to put a hard, fast timeline on these permits of 30 to 45 days maximum. Otherwise, there just should be approved, because there's no reason it should take more than that.
There's residential between White Avenue and the river north of you, residential from White Avenue south of where you are. So you're right in the middle of that. Have you been in part of any citizen initiative that wants to get some ideas going for the residential part of Old Strathcona? And how did that go with your dealings with the bureaucracy?
Well, I was fortunate to sit on the Old Strathcona Business Association for this past year, and so there were a little bit more interaction there about trying to look at opportunities for density or upgrades to certain buildings around White Avenue in order to bring more people who may potentially live, work, and play in the area, which benefits everybody if that happens. There were a number of projects that were shelved. One in particular that I was so excited about back before COVID, that was going to take place behind, it used to be an old church, some of you may remember, that was just behind, it would have been on 80th Avenue and about 105th Street, close to where the old keg building used to be, behind what used to be the billiard club and so on. That land is still sitting empty, because what had happened was, I knew the guy, his kids and Xavier were in school together at the preschool. So he got telling me about this project that he put together, and it had some significant investment. I think it was the first project that was allowed that was going to be about upwards of about 15 or 16 stories. And he had been told two things. One, he had to be putting parking underground that was available to the public, which again, this was a private building, it was development, but he said he could accommodate that. And then he also was told that there had to be some element of social housing or affordable housing. And this is where he hit a wall. He said, look, okay, we're trying to build density. We're trying to offer some sort of an equation that works for the development side and then the return. We can accommodate the parking, but affordable housing, we can't guarantee that until the end of the project to see what we can maybe allocate to it. So they had got all the approvals. They had opened up an office that actually was going to be the sales office right across the street from where the development was happening. From what I understood, the city came down so hard on them because they wouldn't commit to affordable housing in there at all. The whole thing got shelved. I think he lost a lot of money. That property is still sitting empty behind there. So you can't tell me that because again, the view of the bureaucracy and those who are allowing developments to happen are so short-sighted that they're not allowing projects to even move forward. They'd rather have that investment disappear and just lots of land sit empty than try to figure out a way to make it work and then see if you can incorporate things in the future. Again, the attitude seems to be backwards. Otherwise, you would have a lot of things happening and then ways to incorporate some of the end goals of maybe how you can cooperate more effectively after the fact. I would rather have that challenge than have the challenge of empty spaces sitting when there could be density brought to the area, redevelopment, improvements for tax revenue. All of this is something that sets us completely behind other markets.
What solution would you bring to it? Would you suggest to the bureaucracy, okay, we'll build this and the social housing, we won't put it here, but we'll put it over here?
There are a lot of solutions, and look, there are opportunities where you can work in certain neighborhoods where we're looking to get more improvement, more development. You can put incentives in place for developers to develop something exactly like that, where you can actually encourage social, more affordable housing, blend that to some extent, and be able to utilize something like that to give maybe a reduction in taxes over a short period of time if they develop this thing. But there's so many creative ways you can do it where I'm certain that the approach of many of the bureaucrats, as well as some of the affected elected officials, they're not thinking out of the box. And so it's funny, more recently I've heard, people say, and the question came up tonight, how can you bring something to the table that some of the existing councillors who have all the experience? Well, all this experience is killing us. It's not creating the type of city that we want. It's not creating the opportunities for future generations. It's not even achieving the housing goals that they want to try to achieve. But there's so many ways to do that. And I don't say in partnership with private sector. I think the private sector will find opportunities themselves if you just create the environment and create the incentive for them to be able to make those investments. We're killing it on so many fronts in a negative way, literally killing it, that these places are sitting empty. I even raised the example of a project in the last town hall that again is just mind-boggling. At just around the corner from Rooster Kitchen, we have a empty spot that would used to be Knox Church. The group had bought that land, knocked down the church, remediated the land. They had all the permits ready to go. And again, without thinking, the city puts the bike lane right in front of the only access of this property. So the whole thing, from what I understand, they lost their shirts because they couldn't get the city to change this, even stop that bike lane not even 50 feet before the intersection corner so that this property could develop. You would have achieved density. You would have had a lot that's prime lot functioning right now, because this happened a few years ago. Instead, we killed that whole initiative, and what I understand really affected that company that was trying to do the development in a very negative way. And all for what? A bike lane that could have stopped not even, like I said, 50 yards before where it was, before you came to the major intersection. Why anyone would have stopped that, I don't even understand.
Okay, you've opened the door to that. What's your take on bike lanes?
Well, I think that I wouldn't. We've got the situation where we're stuck with bike lanes now. I would not want to develop bike lanes further at this particular juncture. I think we have enough. We've spent a lot on them. The feedback is really mixed on behalf of Edmontonians, with, I would say, a majority against them, especially when you see that you're trying to get your kid to school, or you're trying to walk down the sidewalk after a huge snowstorm, and the only place that's clear is the bike lanes and nobody's even on them. So that's something that I think I would put a complete moratorium on bike lanes. And I would go back and visit those particular negative outcomes as a result of the bike lanes, where modifications can be made so that you're not impeding development, you're not impeding the flow of traffic. A number of things that, unfortunately, again, was short-sighted vision when it came to creating bike lanes all over the city. We have some amazing bike lanes that were natural bike lanes through the river valley that could be encouraged, enhanced, and developed even further. Doing what's been done, where you've affected now the development of something like housing that's so important for our future. that's where we need to revisit and give our heads a shake and say, is this really the outcome that you wanted with bike lanes? So I know that the frustration's high enough that I don't think we need to invest any more in bike lanes. But where we do need to do is review and see how maybe where there's been the negative outcomes, we can adjust to accordingly to develop something. I think your mic's off, Scott.
There we go. Silence is golden, but something that isn't adding up. Why are taxes constantly going up, but services declining?
Yeah, I again, it comes back to this. I think such an important and hard and fast rule when it comes to what cities should be focused on. I'm talking about getting back to the basics. Yeah, I haven't been a councillor or a mayor before, but I can tell you, I run my business very tightly. We are doing a lot more with a lot less. And so are so many Edmontonians. When it comes to affordability, you wouldn't believe how many of them are cutting out things that they used to enjoy as families, as individuals, as whatever. They used to take advantage of doing things in the city, and they're changing their behavior. We need to change the behavior of City Hall and the leadership to focus on the basics of what this city should be doing and do it well. That's where I think is there's been a complete breakdown. Again, I point to ideology, but I think it's again the rules and the responsibilities for what a city needs to do is plain and clear in the municipal act. And that's something that we should get back to and say, how do we make the roads better for our citizens? How do we create a safer transit so they can get around and affordable opportunities for transportation? How can we ensure that we're attracting investment here and do the things that can help continue to do those core services more effectively? These are the things that I think I am so committed to, and I would encourage those who are going, obviously, to vote this fall to ask that question. If you're feeling that the services that you're paying for and paying for in record high amounts, if they're not getting the services they feel they deserve, then they need to ask themselves who is best suited to get back to the core services and deliver those effectively. Clearly, those on council now and the current mayor are not focused on that type of delivery of services, of core services, or the basic things that a city should do well. I hope, as I mentioned, to really over the next few weeks, not only make announcements on some of these things that I believe are so important to getting back the focus on how a city should operate, but culminate that into something that's going to really resonate, I think, with Edmontonians in a way that shows a thoughtful process and platform that they can get behind, to know that if we are successful, as I hope to be after October 20th, that focus to deliver first class services that are the basic role and responsibilities of people who are entrusted with the city are done effectively, and get out of the other things that we shouldn't be wasting our time, energy, not even our time, energy, or money, but Edmontonians' time, money, and energy.
And as you work towards that, you're doing all the listening right now and hearing from Edmontonians. What are the nice to haves and what are the need to haves that they're telling you about?
Well, I think, like I said, the affordability, we've come in and out of that conversation. I think all of them that I've spoke to are saying enough is enough. They'd like to see, they'd like not to be squeezed at every turn from the city. So affordability, looking at ways to bring down costs for Edmontonians, is going to be one of the top things that everyone's been sharing. Of course, the development of our communities, the infill problem, that's something that they want to be dealt with immediately. Unfortunately, even I think some of the development, the zoning bylaw is supposed to go till 2026 or 2027. So I think, if I'm fortunate enough, I hope to work to council to repeal that, because that's something that I know so many are upset about. And then I think, as I said, I've heard this on a daily basis for especially my staff, who rely on me to make sure we have a functioning business, but for them to come into work and have these horrendous stories of the challenges they faced riding public transit, and having, parents tell me they're not going to trust their kids alone on the transit, let alone take it themselves. I mean, these are all things that I hear daily. And of course, we talked about parking, and just one little thing to stimulate growth and help people spend money in their communities. These are the different things that I've continuously heard. One of the things that I sitting out in my backyard, or anyone in a park, you continue to slap yourself silly because of all the damn mosquitoes in this city. That's another big problem, that especially in the summertime you hear people are trying to get out and be at festivals and take part in things, and they're spraying themselves to death. Here's another outcome of something where we're trying to cut aerosols. All the environmentalists want to reduce carbon emissions, and yet they're encouraging everyone to buy bug spray all the time and spray it all over the place. I think if we dealt with that problem as well, it would be something that you'd have less frustration, because I hear that from people sitting out on my patio and they run in because they're getting swarmed. So I think like all of these sort of things are things we're hearing, and I'm sure I'll continue to hear them. And I'm looking forward to collecting some of the things that they're sharing with me, and putting some productive and effective solutions in place that will help to address their concerns and help to make it easier for them to enjoy the things they love so much about this city, and future opportunities for them as well.
Well, we're down to the final minute. Here's your chance. What do you need to hear from Edmontonians as we work towards October 20th?
Well, I launched the Revive Edmonton tour because I want to rebuild trust, reset priorities, and bring accountability back to City Hall. Too many people feel like their voices don't matter anymore, and I'm here to change that. Our campaign is built on one simple promise for all of Edmonton. That means every community, every background, every voice. If you believe in that mission, I'd love for you to join Team Jaffer. We're looking for volunteers, supporters, and of course, donors who want to help us bring common sense back to City Hall. So please, sign up at votejaffer.ca and become part of the energy that's going to, I think, change things after October 20th.
And we're not done right now. We're doing this again Friday. We're doing it again a couple of times next week. So think about what you want to ask candidate Rahim Jaffer, and join us Friday night when we do this once again. So thanks for tuning in. Thanks for your questions. Thanks for the good discussion. See you soon.
Thanks.